The shattered sky. The first tear in the sky came without warning. At the edge of the Valari Expanse, where star systems hung like jewels scattered across a velvet void, reality itself split apart. At first, it looked like a trick of the eye, a shimmer of light reflecting from some distant sun. But as the rift widened, bleeding crimson and cobalt fire into the darkness, the instruments aboard the Solarion Vanguard screamed with impossible readings. Commander Kael Draven stood on the bridge, hands clasped tightly behind his back as the crew scrambled around him. His jaw was set, his sharp eyes never leaving the massive rupture forming in the void. "Report," he ordered. His voice carried the authority of decades in service. "Sir, spatial anomalies are escalating. The rift is destabilizing the sector's gravity wells," said Lieutenant Wren, her hands flying across her console. "Nearby moons are shifting in orbit, stars help us, entire planets are pulling toward the tear." Kael narrowed his eyes. "And the source?" "No known origin, Commander. It's like space itself decided to split." The rift pulsed again, brighter this time. Energy waves rippled outward, rattling the hull. For a moment, Kael felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from awe. In all his years across the stars, he had never seen anything like it. "Transmit full scans to High Command," he said, turning toward his comm officer. "Mark this as a Class Omega anomaly. Nothing leaves this system until we understand what we're looking at." The crew nodded, but Kael could see unease written across their faces. Space was vast, mysterious, and merciless, but even veterans like these knew when something was wrong, when the void itself seemed unnatural. The rift widened again. This time, something came through. A sliver of blackness, darker than space itself, pushed from the rupture. At first it looked like debris, then like a ship, but its form shifted, fractal-like, wrong. It pulsed with a strange organic glow, wings unfurling like an insect drawn from cocoon. Then came another. And another. Kael's gut tightened. His voice was cold, calm, precise. "Sound battle stations." The klaxons wailed. The Solarion Vanguard's sleek hull shuddered as weapons arrays powered up, the hum of plasma coils rising like a war drum. The alien shapes moved in unison, silent and graceful, their black shells gleaming in the rift light. "Sir," Lieutenant Wren whispered, eyes wide. "They're alive." The first swarm descended. Bolts of radiant plasma streaked into the void, carving trails of blue fire. The alien forms responded with unnatural speed, weaving between the blasts, their own weapons crackling with viridian energy. One bolt struck the Vanguard's shields, rippling them with a jarring wave that knocked crew members from their feet. "Shields at 70%, shouted the defense officer. Kael didn't flinch. "Target the largest. Pin it down." The Vanguard unleashed a torrent of firepower, lighting up the dark expanse. One of the massive insectoid vessels screeched, a sound that pierced through the comms in raw static, as though it clawed directly into the minds of the crew. The ship broke apart, spilling fragments that pulsed like eggs before dissolving into nothingness. But for each one destroyed, more emerged. "They're multiplying," Wren said, horror in her voice. "Every fragment, Commander, it's birthing more of them." Kael's heart pounded in his chest. Not fear. Not yet. But the sharp calculation of a man who had lived through wars others only read about. "Helm, pull us back. We need distance." The pilot obeyed, but the swarm pursued, their movements eerily coordinated, like the fluttering of a single vast organism. The rift pulsed again, releasing something larger, an immense shadow, bristling with tendrils of living metal, its body so vast it eclipsed a star in the distance. Gasps filled the bridge. Kael drew a slow breath. So this is what waits on the other side. The battle turned desperate. The Vanguard fought with every weapon in its arsenal, its crew straining under the relentless assault. Fighters deployed, darting through the chaos, sacrificing themselves to buy the fleet precious moments. But the swarm adapted, changing formations, hardening their shells, reflecting beams that had cut through them only minutes before. "They're learning," Wren said, sweat glistening on her brow. "Every second, they're evolving." Kael felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This was no mere encounter with a hostile species. This was an invasion. A calculated push from beyond the rift. The massive swarm leviathan released a pulse that shattered the shields in an instant. Consoles exploded, sparks flying across the bridge. Smoke filled the air, acrid and choking. Crew screamed as gravity shifted, the ship groaning against the impact of invisible waves. Damage control. Kael barked, gripping the railing to stay upright. Give me a comms line to High Command. Transmission jamming, sir, the rift itself is interfering. Kael swore under his breath. Every instinct told him they weren't meant to survive this battle. But survival wasn't his duty. Warning the galaxy was. Prepare the beacon, he ordered, his voice steel. We're sending this through the subspace channels. If we don't make it, the galaxy must know. The swarm closed in. Alien ships latched onto the hull, their claws piercing steel. Boarding tendrils began to bore through the Vanguard's armor. Soldiers rushed to intercept, gunfire echoing down corridors. Kael turned to Rin. Her eyes were filled with fire, but he could see the question in them, the unspoken plea. What if this is the end? It won't be, he said firmly. Not while I still breathe. He slammed the beacon control. Across subspace, a burst of encrypted data leapt into the stars, the last desperate warning of the Solarion fleet. A tremor shook the bridge. The Leviathan loomed directly above them now, blotting out everything else. Its tendrils reached forward, wrapping around the Vanguard like a predator's claws. Kael straightened his uniform. His voice carried above the chaos. All hands brace for impact. The Leviathan's maw opened, glowing with viridian fire. The sky itself seemed to shatter as it struck. And in the final flash before darkness consumed the ship, Kael thought of the words he'd sworn when he joined the Alliance: "We are the shield between the stars and the void." The void had come. And the galaxy would never be the same. The last hope. The beacon had traveled. Across the void, through layers of interference and subspace distortion, the desperate warning of the Solarion Vanguard finally reached the core worlds of the Alliance. And with it came fear, fear so deep it cracked the foundation of civilizations that had stood united for centuries. On the marble steps of the Citadel of Unity, under the eternal glow of the twin suns, the High Council convened. Representatives from dozens of worlds argued, their voices rising in panic. Holographic projections of alien swarm ships flickered above them, looping endlessly as the beacon's recording replayed the last moments of Commander Kael Draven's fleet. They consumed the Vanguard in minutes, cried Counselor Saris of the Volari system. You saw it with your own eyes. These are not enemies we can fight. We must retreat, evaluate the frontier, and abandon the outer colonies before the swarm reaches us. And leave billions of lives defenseless, thundered another, Counselor Jern from Elysium Prime. The Solarion Alliance was built to protect, not to run. If we abandon them, we may as well declare the rift already victorious. The chamber erupted with shouting. Accusations flew like arrows. Worlds that had sworn loyalty to each other now spoke only of self-preservation. In the shadows at the edge of the chamber, Kael Draven watched silently. Against all odds, he had survived. His scarred face bore the marks of fire and battle, his uniform was torn and scorched, his left arm bound in synth fabric after the desperate escape pod crash. But his eyes, steel gray, unyielding, still burned with purpose. When the counselors' voices reached a crescendo, Kael stepped forward. His boots echoed across the chamber. Slowly, the noise died. You argue about retreat while the void gathers at our doorstep, Kael said, his voice carrying like a blade across the silence. I have seen what comes through the rift. I have fought it. And I tell you this, if we run, there will be nowhere left to hide. All eyes turned to him. Some with awe, others with suspicion. Counselor Saris sneered. And what do you propose, Commander? Another glorious charge into the swarm, as your fleet did? We all saw how that ended. Kael's jaw tightened. We fought to buy you time. That time is slipping away. If you do not unite, you will die divided. The chamber murmured. Even Saris faltered. Kael took another step forward, his voice rising with the conviction of a man who had walked through fire and returned. The swarm is not mindless. It learns, adapts, grows. Every ship we destroy, every tactic we use, it turns into fuel for its evolution. And it does not come on its own. Something drives it. Something beyond the rift. I felt it. I heard it in the static and the screams of its leviathans. This is not war, it is assimilation. It will not stop until every world, every soul, is part of its hive. Silence fell. The truth of his words hung heavy. Counselor Jern leaned forward, eyes narrowed. If what you say is true, then how do we fight an enemy that cannot be outmatched? Kael exhaled slowly. His answer was dangerous, desperate, but it was the only path left. We don't fight the swarm. We fight the rift. The council chamber descended into chaos again, but this time the debate shifted. Some called Kael mad. Others, inspired by his resolve, demanded he be given command. In the end, desperation overrode doubt. The council granted Kael authority to form a strike force, the Alliance's last hope. Within days, the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever assembled gathered at Arden Spire, the fortress shipyard that hung above the storm-racked world of Kaler Prime. Dozens of battlecruisers, carriers, and frigates floated like armored titans in orbit, their hulls gleaming under the pale light of the stars. Pilots drilled tirelessly, engineers modified weapons, and soldiers prayed quietly to gods both old and forgotten. On the bridge of his new flagship, the Aegis Dawn, Kael studied a holomap of the rift. His face was grim, but his mind was sharp. This was no longer about defense. This was about survival. Lieutenant Wren, miraculously recovered from the Vanguard's wreckage and now at his side again, approached. Her voice was quieter than usual. You're asking them to fight a war they may not win. Kael glanced at her. Wars are not always about winning, Wren. Sometimes they're about ensuring someone else lives to fight tomorrow. Her eyes softened, but only for a moment. And what if there is no tomorrow? Kael turned back to the map. The rift pulsed with malevolent light. Then we make one. The fleet's first mission was reconnaissance. Kael led a small squadron into swarm territory, far beyond where the colonies had already been consumed. What they found froze even his hardened blood. Entire worlds stripped to barren rock. Cities reduced to skeletal husks. Oceans drained, their water siphoned into hive tendrils that reached from orbit. And above each dead planet floated swarm leviathans, birthing more ships, each one larger than the last. Gods help us, Wren whispered as they passed a ruined colony. They don't conquer. They harvest. Kael said nothing, but his fists clenched at his sides. Their scanners picked up something stranger still. Deep in swarm space, beyond a shield of leviathans, pulsed a structure unlike any ship. It was vast, organic, and alive, a heart, beating in sync with the rift itself. Kael's voice was low, grim. There it is. The source. Before they could gather more data, the swarm struck. Fighters poured from the darkness, intercepting the Solarion squadron. The Aegis Dawn roared with fire, tearing through the enemy, but their numbers were endless. Kael gave the order to retreat, barely escaping with fragments of data. Back at Arden Spire, he presented his findings to the council. The swarm is not random, Kael said, pointing to the pulsing structure on the holomap. It is a hive. A command node. Destroy it, and we break their coordination. Fail, and the rift will spread until nothing remains. Counselor Saris's face was pale. And if we throw our fleets at this hive and lose? Kael looked him in the eye. His voice was iron. Then we make our last stand. But better to fall fighting than be consumed alive. That night, Kael stood alone in the observation deck of the Aegis Dawn. The stars stretched endlessly before him, cold and distant. The rift pulsed faintly at the edge of his vision, a wound bleeding across the galaxy. For the first time in years, Kael allowed himself to think of home, the fields of Kaeler Prime, his father's voice teaching him that a man's worth was not measured by how he lived, but by how he faced the end. He closed his eyes. The end was coming. But he would not meet it kneeling. When dawn broke across the fleet's systems, Kael Draven's orders echoed through every ship. Prepare for war. Our tomorrow is forged in fire. And so the Solarion alliance, fractured but not broken, steeled itself for the impossible. The rift loomed ahead, vast and merciless. The swarm gathered, a tide of darkness without end. And Kael, scarred but unyielding, led them forward. The galaxy's last hope had a name. The Solarian's last stand. The fleet moved like a single blade drawn from its sheath, sharp and gleaming, cutting across the stars. At its head, the Aegis Dawn sailed proud, its hull scarred but unbroken. Around it, 1,000 Solarion ships formed the greatest armada in recorded history, carriers bristling with fighters, cruisers armed with planet-cracking cannons, and nimble frigates darting like wolves around the pack. They burned toward the rift, where the galaxy's fate would be decided. On the command deck of the Aegis Dawn, Commander Kael Draven stood silent, hands clasped behind his back. His officers moved with grim efficiency, but the tension in the air was thick, every face pale with the knowledge of what lay ahead. Lieutenant Wren broke the silence. "We're entering swarm space." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed unease. Long-range sensors picking up, thousands of signatures. Maybe more. Kael nodded slowly. They've been waiting. The rift dominated the view screen, a cosmic wound, pulsing with light both beautiful and terrifying. And from its jagged edges poured the swarm, endless and hungry. The final battle had begun. The swarm struck first. From the rift poured wave after wave of alien ships, black shapes unfolding like living nightmares. Swarm fighters darted forward, wings glittering with viridian fire, while leviathans the size of moons pushed through the rift's maw, tendrils reaching to strangle the fleet. All ships, open fire. Kael barked. The void erupted into war. Solarion cannons roared, hurling lances of plasma that seared through the dark. Fighters swarmed, weaving through enemy lines in blazing streaks of light. Explosions blossomed across the black, beautiful and deadly. The first Leviathan screamed as torpedoes tore through its flesh-metal hide, but even as it died, more poured through the rift. On the Aegis Dawn's bridge, alarms wailed. Shields holding at 60%, an officer shouted. "Maintain formation," Kael commanded. His voice was iron, steady against the chaos. "Keep the line tight. They'll try to scatter us." But the swarm adapted quickly, as it always did. Smaller ships split off, feinting, drawing Solarion frigates into traps. Fighters were consumed by swarms of insectoid drones, shredded before they could even cry out. A cruiser erupted in flame, its pieces devoured by the enemy even as they drifted away. Wren clenched her fists. "We can't hold this line forever." Kael's gaze locked on the rift. "We're not here to hold. We're here to end it." The plan was desperate, suicidal. But it was the only chance. Deep within the rift pulsed the swarm's heart, the massive hive node Kael had discovered in his reconnaissance mission. If destroyed, it would shatter the swarm's coordination, buying the galaxy time to rebuild. But to reach it, they would have to pierce through the leviathans guarding the rift itself. Kael turned to his officers. "Signal the fleet. Phase 2. Across the armada, ships shifted formation. Carriers unleashed their last reserves of fighters, diving into the swarm in kamikaze runs. Destroyers pushed forward, their cannons overloading as they carved holes through the enemy ranks. The Aegis Dawn led the charge, its railguns blazing, carving a burning path toward the rift. The Leviathans descended, blotting out the stars. One lunged, tendrils lashing. The Aegis Dawn rolled hard, its hull groaning as the tentacles scraped across its shields. "Target its core," Kael shouted. The ship's cannons fired in unison, striking the Leviathan's glowing heart. The beast screamed, shuddering before erupting in a storm of molten shards. But as it fell, two more took its place. Every victory bled them. Every advance cost ships, lives, hope. At last, the hive node loomed ahead, a monstrous structure pulsing with alien light, its surface crawling with millions of drones. The rift itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with it, as though the galaxy's wound beat to the same heart. Kael's comm officer paled. "Sir, we're receiving a signal." The bridge speakers hissed with static, then a voice, low, layered, and human, filled the air. "Children of the stars. You resist. Futile. You will join. You will serve." The crew shuddered, some clutching their heads as the voice clawed into their minds. Rin gritted her teeth. "It's inside our systems, inside us." Kael stood firm. His voice was cold steel. "Tell it this, Solarion serves no master." He raised his hand. "All ships. Fire everything you have." The fleet unleashed hell. Torpedoes streaked into the hive node, detonating in brilliant bursts. Beams of plasma lanced across its surface, burning deep into its flesh-metal skin. Fighters swarmed in, diving through gaps and unloading their payloads in suicidal strikes. The hive shrieked, the sound reverberating through every comm channel, every skull. But the swarm fought back with everything it had. Drones poured from the hive like locusts, overwhelming fighters, tearing frigates apart. Leviathans rammed carriers, dragging them into the rift. One by one, Solarion ships died in fire. The Aegis Dawn pressed on, its hull tearing, its crew bloodied but unbroken. Kael's voice never wavered. "Forward! Every ship! This is our stand." The Aegis Dawn broke through, soaring within striking range of the hive node. But the ship was crippled, its engines failing, its shields gone. The hive loomed ahead, glowing brighter with every passing second. Rin turned to Kael, desperation in her eyes. "We can't destroy it with what we have left." Kael's gaze was steady. "Not with what we have, but with what we are." He called up the rift's energy readings, the unstable waves surging through the node. If harnessed, it could collapse the rift, but the cost would be everything. He looked around the bridge, meeting every gaze. "We carry the fire of the Alliance. If we fall here, it is not in vain. It is to give the galaxy tomorrow." Rin's eyes welled, but she nodded. "Then let's make it count." Kael gave his final order. "Channel all remaining power into the core. Overload the reactor. Direct it into the rift." The Aegis Dawn became a beacon. Its core flared, brighter and brighter, until its light rivaled the stars. The ship dove forward, straight into the hive node. Swarm drones clawed at it, leviathans tried to intercept, but it surged on, unstoppable, burning like the last breath of a dying sun. Kael stood tall, unflinching, as the ship struck the hive. The explosion was beyond sound, beyond sight. Energy rippled through the rift, tearing it apart. The hive screamed, shattering into fragments. The leviathans convulsed, collapsing in on themselves. The rift buckled, folding, collapsing into nothingness. And with it, the Aegis Dawn was gone. When the fire faded, silence filled the void. The swarm was broken. The rift was no more. The survivors of the Solarion fleet drifted among the wreckage, battered but alive. They stared at the stars, where once had been only darkness, and knew the cost of their survival. In the Citadel of Unity, when word of the victory reached the core worlds, there was no celebration. Only solemn silence, and the knowledge that legends had been born. Commander Kael Draven's name would be etched into eternity, not as the man who saved the galaxy, but as the man who chose to stand when all others faltered. The galaxy would rebuild. The stars would shine again. And the memory of the Solarians' last stand would echo across them forever.